humans of the internet, and welcome once again to Bowtie Talks. Of course, I'm your excellent host, Luke Johnson, coming to you as usual from an undisclosed location in Midwest USA with some more historical insights. I figured that since last week's episode was about the history of New Year's Eve traditions in this country, I thought now would be a good time to discuss the history of the calendar in this country and also discuss some of the traditions that have made their way over here from other countries, because after all, that is part of what makes America great. Although now that I think about it, another way to say that would have been cultural holidays from other countries. So please bear with me as I dive into the history of calendar usage in this country, and of course, some of the many festivals and holidays that were brought to other countries. Well, now with the introduction out of the way, I think would be a good time to tell you that America has not always used the Gregorian calendar. Prior to 1752, England and the American colonies used the Julian calendar. What is the Julian calendar, you ask? Well, in 45 BC, Julius Caesar ordered a calendar consisting of 12 months based on a solar year. This calendar employed a cycle of 3 years of 365 days, followed by a year of 366 days, a leap year, otherwise known as. And when first implemented, the Julian calendar moved the beginning of the year from March 1st to January 1st. However, following the fall of the Roman Empire in the 5th century, the new year was gradually realigned to coincide with Christian festivals until by the 7th century, Christmas Day marked the beginning of the new year in many countries. And by the 9th century, parts of southern Europe began observing the first day of the year on March 25th to coincide with Annunciation Day. You're wondering if that's the holiday 9 months prior to Christmas, celebrating the angel Gabriel's appearance to the Virgin Mary that she would be the mother of Jesus. However, England did not adopt this change in the beginning of the new year until late in the 12th century. And because the year began in March, records referring to the first month pertain to March, to the second month pertain to April, and so on and so on. So the 19th of the 12th month would be February 19th. And in fact, Latin September means 7th month, October means 8th month, November means 9th month, and December means 10th month. And use of numbers rather than names of months was especially prevalent in Quaker records. What caused the change? Well, during the Middle Ages, it became apparent that the Julian leap year formula had overcompensated for the actual length of a solar year, having added an extra day every 128 years. However, no adjustments were made to compensate this. And by 1582, seasonal equinoxes were falling 10 days too early, and some church holidays, such as Easter, did not always fall in the proper seasons. And in that year, Pope Gregory XIII authorized, and most Roman Catholic countries adopted, the Gregorian or New Style calendar. You're welcome. As part of the change, 10 days were dropped from the month of October, and the formula for determining the leap years was revised so that only years divisible by 400 at the end of the century would be leap years. January 1st was established as the first day of the new year. However, Protestant countries, including England and its colonies, because they did not recognize the authority of the Pope, continued to use the Julian calendar. And the two calendar system soon began to have problems. Between 1582 and 1752, not only were two calendars in use in Europe and in the European colonies, but two different starts of the year were used in England. Although the quote-unquote legal year began on March 25th, the use of Gregorian calendars by other European countries led to January 1st being celebrated as New Year's Day and given as the first day of the year in almanacs. And to avoid misinterpretation, both the Old New Year and the New Year were recognized in England and occasionally church records for dates falling between the New Year, January the 1st, and the Old New Year, March 25th. A system known as double dating was created. Such dates are usually identified with a slash mark, breaking the old style and the new style. For example, March 19th, 1631/2. Occasionally, writers would express the double date with a hyphen. Same date, only hyphen 5032. And in general, double dating was more common in civil than in church. However, this soon changed in 1752 thanks to an act of parliament in 1750. England and its colonies changed calendars in 1752, and by that time the discrepancy between a solar New Year and the Julian calendar had grown by an additional day. so that the calendar used in England and its colonies was 11 days out of sync with the Gregorian calendar, which was obviously used in most other parts of Europe. England's calendar change included three major components. The Julian calendar was replaced by the Gregorian calendar, which changed the formula for calculating leap years. The beginning of the legal new year was moved from March 25th to January 1st, and 11 days were dropped from the month of September 1752. And the change involved a series of steps. December the 30th, 1750 was followed by January 1st, 1750. Under the old calendar, December was the 10th month and January was the 11th month. March 24th, 1750 was followed by March 25th, 1751, as that was the old New Year. December 31st, 1751 was followed by January 1st, 1752. This followed the switch of the first day of the year. And September 2nd, 1752 was followed by September 14th, 1752 because of a drop of 11 days was used to conform to the Gregorian calendar. And it goes without saying that different days mean different things for different people. And of course, when new cultures and immigrants began to migrate to the United States, they brought their old traditions with them. And the United States also created new holidays. During the 20th century, Columbus Day was added to the American calendar thanks to efforts from Italian Americans. And of course, when my people, the Irish, came to this country, they brought St. Patrick's Day with them. However, St. Patrick's Day as we know it was not always really how it was celebrated. The great St. Patrick was originally celebrated for bringing Christianity to Ireland during the 5th century. In Ireland, up until about the mid-20th century, the holiday remained modest and grounded in religion. It was not until the 1960s in Ireland St. Patrick's Day came to even bear a striking resemblance to the way it is celebrated in the United States. And even to this day, March 17th is seen as a more solemn day for Mass and way to honor the people who came before us. And it was traditionally celebrated with Mass, as previously stated, in the morning and the partaking of modest feasts in the afternoon. And there were no parades and certainly no emerald-tinted food products because blue, not green, was the traditional color associated with Ireland's patron saint prior to the 1798 Irish Rebellion. Anyone wondering what that was? During 1798, rebels retaliated against British rule in Ireland. The color green became a signifier for the Society of United Irishmen. A man named Napper Tandy was a leading figure in the insurrection who helped to form the Dublin branch of the Society for United Irishmen. And wearing of the color green was seen as a punishable offense. This would later go said in the Irish nationalist ballad, The Wearing of the Green. First stanza of which goes, "O Paddy dear, and did you hear the news that's going round? The shamrock is by law forbid to grow on Irish ground. No more St. Patrick's Day will keep, his color can't be seen, for there's a cruel law again, the wearing of the green. I met with Napper Tandy, and he took me by the hand, and he said, how's poor old Ireland, and how does she stand? She's the most distressful country that ever yet was seen, for they're hanging men and women for the wearing of the green." The city of Massachusetts has long staked claim to the first St. Patrick's Day celebration in the American colonies. It was on March 17, 1737, when more than 24 Presbyterians who immigrated from the north of Ireland gathered to honor St. Patrick and formed the Charitable Irish Society to assist distressed Irishmen in the city. The oldest Irish organization in North America still holds an annual dinner every St. Patrick's Day. However, a historian, Michael Francis, unearthed evidence that St. Augustine, Florida may have hosted the first American St. Patrick's Day celebration. While researching Spanish gunpowder expenditure logs, found records that indicate cannon blasts or gunfire were used to honor the saint in 1600, and that residents of the Spanish garrison town processed through the city streets in honor of St. Patrick the following year, perhaps at the behest of an Irish priest who may have been living there. Ironically, it was a band of redcoats who started the storied green tradition of America's largest and longest St. Patrick's Day parade when, in 1762, Irish-born soldiers serving in the British Army marched through lower Manhattan to a St. Patrick's Day breakfast at a local tavern. The March 17th parades by the Irish through the streets of New York City raised the dander of nativist anti-Catholic mobs who started their own tradition of patty-making on the eve of St. Patrick's Day by erecting figures of Irishmen wearing rags and necklaces of potatoes with whiskey bottles in their hands until the practice was banned in 1803. Irish Catholics flooded into the country, as I discussed in the first ever episode of Bowtie Talks during the 1840s. No, the Irish came here during the 1840s. Not I did a podcast episode during the 1840s. Come on, people, I'm not that old. I may sound it, but I'm not that old. Well, anyway, the Irish immigrants clung to their old ways and took to the streets in St. Patrick's Day parades to show strength in numbers as a retort to the Know Nothing Party, as I also discussed in the first ever episode of Bowtie Talks. Ideas toward the Irish began to soften after the Civil War, and tens of thousands of Irishmen served. They went out as second-class citizens, but came back as heroes, as was stated by historian Mike McCormick. And as the Irish began to assimilate into American culture, those without Celtic blood began to join in St. Patrick's Day celebrations. And interestingly, the traditional St. Patrick's Day meal in the United States is not actually Irish. While ham and cabbage was eaten in Ireland, corned beef proved a cheaper substitute for impoverished immigrants, because in Ireland, pork was the everyman's meal, and beef was considered a luxury only afforded by the very wealthy. Corned beef and cabbage became popular in the United States because the Irish Americans living in the slums of lower Manhattan, who purchased leftover provisions from ships returning from the tea trade in China, began using some of the beef scraps they had collected. It was the cheapest meat they could find, historian Mike McCormick says. I boiled beef 3 times, the last time with the cabbage to remove some of the brine. And to this day in Ireland, the traditional St. Patrick's Day meal is ham or bacon. And now, time to talk about some more roots of mine, the Germans, and, of course, Oktoberfest. Oktoberfest has its origins in 1810, when the Crown Prince of Bavaria, Ludwig, married Princess Therese of Saxony-Hildburghausen, and to appease some peasants and militiamen who had rebelled the previous year in favor of Austrian rule, they invited the peasants to celebrate their nuptials in Munich with a horse race. Let them watch horses and drink beer, as it were. It was a wild success, and the field where the event held was promptly named Theresienhuis after the bride, and the Bavarian Agriculture Association recognized the event was good for the local economy and decided to keep it going, and so Oktoberfest was born. Now, I'm afraid the story of how Oktoberfest came to the United States isn't quite as straightforward as the tale of German immigrants bringing it with them. A huge wave of German immigrants did come to the United States during the second half of the 19th century, and they largely settled in the Midwest, an area called the German Triangle, which consisted of Milwaukee, Cincinnati, and St. Louis, as well as some significant communities on the East Coast and in Texas. The first Oktoberfest in the United States did not take place until some 100 years later in La Crosse, Wisconsin. And while the number of people in Wisconsin of German heritage might have laid the groundwork for the success of Oktoberfest, it was the good old-fashioned Chamber of Commerce that really brought it to life. In 1960, the Greater La Crosse Chamber of Commerce was looking for something to replace their annual winter carnival, which had went defunct after the 1920s, in order to promote tourism and hometown pride for the city. The Chamber's answer to this problem was to team up with the German-owned G. Hilleman Brewing Company to put on an Oktoberfest. And lest everyone in Texas get upset, as Texas also has quite a big German population, Wurstfest had began in New Braunfels, Texas, which is essentially Oktoberfest held in November with a special focus on sausage. And Cincinnati followed in 1976 and now attracts more than 7,000 attendees. And with that, I'm afraid I'll have to be moving on now, folks. But if you would like to hear from me again, or if you have your own ideas of shows in the future, please let me know in the comments, or you can also email me at bowtietalkspodcast@gmail.com. Goodbye and God bless.